I'd like to welcome you to a very special Talking Hands this evening. We're really going out on a limb here for two reasons. The first, of course, is, as you'll notice, I'm not with my good man, the Prodigal Fool, this evening. I'm with, well, basically what I thought was a very suitable replacement. In fact, an almost more sensible replacement than the usual chap that I do this kind of stuff with. It's a bunny rabbit. And he, unlike the Prodigal Fool, doesn't talk back, doesn't interrupt, doesn't give me a lot of crap, basically, over the kind of comments that we render upon these poor watches that we get for review. The second reason this is important, and why this whole little setup is happening here this evening, is because this watch is, without a doubt, one of the most intriguing and in fact mesmerizing pieces that's come across our way. The Schofield Signalman GMT PR is back for a special evening with the bunny and the Talisker. And guys, this Talisker is courtesy of a very special man called Mark, who I'd like to send my great gratitude and thanks to. This is a particular watch for a number of reasons. The first is it came out of absolutely nowhere. So, one day, some guy called Giles Ellis decides he wants to make watches. And of all things, he pulls inspiration from a lighthouse. You don't believe us? Well, you know what? Take a look at the back of this piece and tell us what you think. That look pretty lighthousey to you? Pretty clear where this is all coming from? How is it that that comes across in this little piece? And this greatly contributes to the good, in fact, which we'll get to in a moment. Well, you'll notice for starters, that although the case is rather large, being 44 meters, that would be rather massive. It'd be lighthouse size, at 44 millimeters in diameter and an actual 15 millimeters high. There's a lovely tapering effect that's going on. I'll bring it up close so that you can hopefully see this from the side for yourself. And that tapering effect, in fact, is not just on the case itself, but is really worked beautifully into the lugs, which of all things make this watch incredibly comfortable to wear. In fact, just to run you through some of the features on the watch, all thanks to the SoProd 9335 movement that's buried inside. You'll find that the 3 o'clock position is a tiny little date function that more often than not you really can't see. Comes with the movement thrown in, so what the hell, but quite frankly, it's a little bit difficult to find. An absolutely gorgeous GMT function down here at the bottom, which highlights an incredible piece of design. I'll actually bring this up close so that we can share it with you in terms of the hand that's used. A gorgeous little GMT hand there with a red tip. And at the very top, you'll see the power reserve function. And if we're close enough and we're in focus, you'll be able to see that it's actually got a lighthouse light projection that is used as the design for the power gauge. A great little touch, and once again, very indicative of the kind of thought that's gone into this watch, particularly the design itself. So, we have all of those tasty little things that get thrown in. You also get 500-meter water resistance, which perhaps goes some way to justifying why this baby is 15 millimeters thick, in fact, for a number of us that might appear on the surface of things to be utterly unwearable. In fact, it turns out not to be. That's a great little secret for later. And you also get an anti-glare treatment on the underside of the sapphire crystal. Given how kind of bright the piece is in general, it might have been helpful to have an anti-glare treatment actually on the surface, on the outer surface of the sapphire crystal, but that's probably quibbling and being a little bit small, isn't it? You agree? I thought you might. The good, no doubt, has to be the overall harmony and I think deep-rooted understanding of aesthetic balance, which this watch exhibits. It's probably the reason why within a couple of minutes of having picked it up at Salon QP, I was pretty much mesmerized by it. I think it's absolutely fair to say that that's the word that's most apt to describe what happened. And it's a number of things, I guess. True that the case itself is rather hefty and large, but the reality is the dial design is such that you find yourself getting pulled down into all the details. So very quickly you're moved away from the size and girth of the piece and pulled right in where it counts. And that's the dial, folks. And what you have here is just tremendous cleanliness. Oh, I'm sorry, the cat's trying to do something to the bunny. Just give me 1 second. Can you get out of here, please? Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. And that poor rabbit never did anything to anybody. Anyways, getting back to this dial configuration, you can already see from the hands themselves that there's a great presence, elongated, long, lovely. It's elegant. It's refined. It does things that you don't expect it to do, and unusually, it marries a very modern, strict, almost austere sense with little flourishes of design flavor, in fact. We'd point to the hands on the GMT dial. I'd also be pointing to the O at the top of it. Instead of a 12, you've got an O, a 3, a 6, and a 9. Now, that may look obvious on the outside, but truth be told, I've never seen a dial use Arabic numbers like this on the outside to create a real sense of balance. So you start at this kind of outer dial part and very quickly work your way into the middle. Let's bring this a little bit closer and hopefully once again into focus so you can check that out too. Yes, everybody keeps complaining they can't see the watch when we hold it. We're trying to do it different this time, and once again you'll notice perhaps things are working better because there's only one of us doing this. So, dial design is an absolute killer, and it's such to the point that you really very quickly move past the size issue. So, design sense all the way through the watch, incredibly well thought out, and you'll also notice this lovely strap too. I think it's important to point out that you can get, and I believe it's 4 different straps from Schofield. This happens to be my pick of the bunch. This is a vintage green suede strap, which is just tremendous, and actually works incredibly well with the basic color of the dial, so the background color of the dial, which is a gray, but it's got some kind of olive khaki touch to it as well. So, once again, lots to look at, lots to savor over. Okay, that's nice, you may say. Past a couple of fancy straps, past the design aesthetic, which apparently totally wows you, and which may impress some of you off at home and not others. I think that the second big point really was a sense that we were looking at something timeless. Now, we often talk a lot on this show about what we think are going to be classics in the future. It's a really, really tough thing to call, right? And many have been proven wrong. So, more often than not, we basically think, screw it, it's not even worth doing. There's something going on here that led to a sense that led at least me to dare to say, I believe this is a classic design that I'm looking at. And it's certainly one that's worked such miracles over a couple of weeks that I've had the watch, that I have enough confidence on air to say, yeah, you know what, guys, I think that passes the mustard. So, yeah, cuts the mustard. Oh, and by the way, did we mention it's anti-magnetic as well? So it's kind of ticking an amazing number of boxes that would really lead you to believe, yeah, no worries, somebody will easily go to 5 or 6 grand for a piece like that. No, 3. All of that for 3. I can't literally believe it. And as far as I understand it, neither can Giles Ellis, who's behind the whole piece, which is apparently why we're probably looking at a price hike somewhere in the next 6 months or so. So you've been fairly warned. There are no guarantees in this. There are a lot of people who come and go in the night. We can crow as much as we want about the design on this thing and about the fact that we find it to be a classic, but at the end of the day, you're also taking an inherent risk, right? So there is a risk. Is it going to be around in a couple of years? What kind of follow-up will there be? Will this be a success or not? Second point is, it is pretty big. And for the dainty-wristed among us, that originally was thought to be kind of a make-or-break issue. Now, as it happens, and for all our friends out there, we're going to give you the wrist shot, the obligatory wrist shot, it turns out that this thing, in fact, wears not only incredibly comfortably, but it doesn't really pose that much of a problem when it comes to strapping it on. Miracle of miracles. Remember that this is a 44 millimeter piece. I think where you start to see the issue, of course, is there. It's this kind of a shot, right? You can see that it's projecting out. But truth be told, I've worn this with shirts and cuffs. I've worn it with suits and ties and all the good stuff. And the reality is that you can pull it off. And part of the advantage, and I know this is supposed to be the bad section, but I can't help myself. The two are so intertwined, the good and the bad on this watch, that you can't talk about one without mentioning the other. And the great part is that's really helped by the lug design, which has a pretty dramatic drop, which makes the watch so much more wearable than any of the really big chunky pieces that we've tried before. So, I mean, once again, never actually had a 44mm test and try for this amount of time, but have had in a couple of 42s that basically started to get uncomfortable. Not the Schofield, even at a most magnificent and a majestic of 44mm, it still manages to pull it off. But nonetheless, there are concerns that could be raised about, the size of this thing. Yeah, you can see it there. Perhaps that's its least flattering angle. Very quickly, you acquire on this watch micro scratches, right? And this is through the normal wear and tear. It's even if you use a chamois or whatever, you always leave behind infinitesimal, slight hazing effect. Guess what? In this case, on this watch, that's a godsend. This is the first watch I've ever come across that I would like to get scuffed and used and beaten and bruised as rapidly as possible. I would never, ever say that about any other watch. But the reason I say that is because if you're no longer distracted by the polish and the brightness of the piece, difficult to get away from, absolutely true, then what you start doing is you start spending a lot more time looking at the dial. And that's really where all the magic and the fun is. This dial, which just has such breadth to it, it's got such depth, it has such an ability to capture your imagination and your attention, that more often than not, you're not telling, or even, you're not even telling anybody what the bloody time is. You've spent 5 minutes have gone by, and you're still looking at the watch thinking, my God, how did it do that? And how did he manage to work that part in? And the numerals around it, how did he manage to marry that with a slight swirl and a little flourish to, for example, the end of the hand for the GMT gauge with the serious, sober lines of the hours and minutes hands. It's little stuff like this that just keeps you looking all day long. Phil and I are pretty conservative. The bottom line is we really have to be sold on a piece before we're willing to put our money down on it, right? And to be sold on a piece means we don't want to buy fad watches. This is not about a flash in the pants and, oh, that looks nice and great, lovely, and 6 months later you're looking to trade it in. By the way, that's another point too. The fool doesn't trade any of his watches in, and I, in fact, did one big trade for the vintage pieces and probably would never do that again. And so in a lot of ways, we spend a lot of our time pruning and preening and making sure the collection is the essence of what great watches should be about. So the fact that nothing new, and over the course of all these talking hands, we've never looked you in the eye and said, yeah, I'd buy that, and actually gone out and done it, right? We've recommended that you consider it, because you may be looking for a piece to buy. But the fool and I have basically sort of stuck to our guns and said, yeah, nice, and moved on. Something happened here. Something pretty seismic, and it came down to the fact that I've had this watch for a couple of weeks now. Thanks very much, Giles, once again, for letting me have it for that long. And I've got to bring it with me back to London tomorrow to mail it back to him. And I'm not sure I'm able to do that. Does that give you a bottom line? Does that give you something you haven't heard before on the show? With the bunny, the cat, the whiskey, the thing, all that's kind of fun stuff. But the reality is here, showing you a piece that literally, I think, is good enough to lock up in a box with something like this. Could we think of a better bottom line to end on? Probably not. So, to all you folks out there, I raise your glass to you. I particularly raise my glass to the chap who managed to pull off something like this. And hopefully given you a talking hands that's a bit different from the norm and a bit more special. Folks, thanks for joining us, the bunny and I. And look forward to welcoming you back for a normal episode of Talking Hands, where I'll hopefully have somebody to squabble with.